It's
nice.
I was better off with the snow.
I think that's what Mary Ann ran into, which is why she's late. So
Um,
because of the car was just a block of ice.
I couldn't believe it. If I hadn't done anything, sure, but I cleaned off the entire car. And there was no more snow. I guess it was like that.
Yes, good work on it. We're good? Okay, would everybody please rise for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You're fine. Welcome.
I had the same problem you did.
Here we have.
Yes, it is. It is. It
I
is.
had a fall last
Take
week,
your
so
time.
I'm like
Well,
really
You don't
scared.
want to repeat that.
No.
Okay, couple of announcements. Let's roll through them. Checks over 25,000 to one to A. Borelli Mechanical for labor and materials for senior center HVAC project. It's about 60,500, and one to PKF O'Connor Davies LLP, which is the 2023 Village Court audit for $34,250. And I'm assuming that we just need to make the announcement that there will be a village board, a special meeting on Friday, January 19th, 2024 at 1 p.m. in Village Hall to conduct interviews for a position in the Recreation and Parks Department. And then two pieces of correspondence. One is from Ann Atchison addressing stormwater management and various suggestions for green infrastructure that can be part of the solution, which I thought were actually very helpful, and I'm thankful that you sent it in. And in particular, the suggestion for the top of the Gabion Wall, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the stones, so we can pass that on to DPW. But my guess is that everybody in the village administration is looking all the time at ways of addressing the stormwater, because it's not going to get better. At least that's the overriding assumption here. The second letter is from Jeff Gluck, and it really expresses support for the work of the Woods Committee and the environmental officer of the Parks Department, in particular with respect to the deer population management proposal that was presented at our last meeting, and encourages additional investment in education. So thank you for those two pieces of correspondence. And we are now on to the consent agenda. Public comment, forgive me. Anybody have anything, public comment? Nothing online, I'm assuming, okay. Then we are on the consent agenda. Minutes and appointment of personnel on library, so I will make a motion to adopt the minutes and the appointment of personnel in library. And anybody want to second that?
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
If you want to save your voice, you can just raise your hand, Larry. We'll get that. Okay. And I think now it's the presentation of Broadway existing conditions, operational study by AKRF, also known as the traffic study.
So Marissa Torallo's here from AKRF, and if I can get this to work, I'm going to put a presentation up that you'll speak to.
Yep.
So, 1 second here.
Thank you for coming out on this night in particular.
Absolutely. Luckily, I'm just down the street. So.
Almost there. Okay. Here we go. Okay.
Well, as Larry mentioned, Marissa Torallo, I'm the Vice President at AKRF in our White Plains office. We conducted an existing conditions operational analysis. What that means is we evaluated traffic conditions under current conditions. So not projecting yet the future traffic that could be, the improvements that may come. We're trying to set a baseline evaluation and analysis of your traffic conditions today. We looked at, if you want to go to the next slide. So I'll just briefly go through what our study area was, which I believe had some input not only from the trustees, but also from the public in a couple of letters that were received while we were scoping this study. The data collection effort, what we collected and when, the results we have, and then recommendations, and then I presume you probably have questions, so we'll do that with the recommendations that we're at right now. So first up is the study area. So we have 10 intersections. This is all the signalized intersections between Clinton and Sunnyside Lane, as well as a host of unsignalized intersections. It's actually 11 intersections if you include Strawberry Lane, which we looked at as a signal warrant analysis to determine if any of, as a representation of whether any of the side streets that are currently unsignalized coming to Route 9 may be getting close to warranting a traffic signal because it's very difficult to get out of them. Similarly, we did a gap analysis, which evaluates how many opportunities there are to get onto the street, which I'll talk about, to get onto 9 from side streets. We did that at Circle, we did it at Fargo, and we did it at Riverview. Everything else we did with a capacity analysis. So I'll talk about that in a second as well, but we give it a grade, level of service A through F. Unlike school, we don't need A's and B's in traffic. The expectation is D is congested conditions, but that could also help with nowadays traffic calming, keeping people from driving too fast. Once we get above D, that is usually a tipping point, particularly on a main road like Broadway, where there's a lot of congestion, at least in that peak period that we're evaluating. And when we get a lot of congestion, we start to get frustrated drivers, we start to get longer queues and backups. So we're really looking for something that's ABC or a reasonable level of service D. So we evaluated all of these intersections here for that capacity analysis. If you want to go to the next slide. So our data collection was in September. We go Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday is considered a typical weekday. Our first major data collection effort that we need in order to do analysis of individual intersections is to count everyone making a left, through, and right at the intersection during peak periods. So we do consider those periods to be 7 to 9 for a weekday AM. We did an afternoon because of the school conditions on this road, so 2 to 4. And then we have PM, which is 4 to 6. Those ATR, that is coupled with automatic traffic recorder counts. So we did the turning movement counts, which you can see here. That's us counting every movement. We do that on one day. That's on Tuesday. But we also put down an ATR. It's still called a tube. You've probably driven across them before. It feels like a wire in the road. Those are down for 7 days, and that allows us to make sure that the Tuesday that we collected all the individual movements is representative of what happens average over a week's period of time.
Sorry, was September selected, and if you want me to save the question till the end.
No, jump right in.
Was September selected because that was just, we asked you and then that was the earliest time you could do it? I'm asking in particular because I'm wondering whether there's any kind of seasonality when you're doing the traffic count.
There is seasonality, so we always have to avoid summer, particularly because this is a school corridor. So actually what happened is we had scoped this back in late winter of 2023, early spring, and then construction also causes changes in traffic patterns, and Sunnyside Lane had a detour that was pretty major. So that deferred the traffic study until September, when there was still some construction. There was a lane closure between, I believe it's Station and Main, but that one lane closure, and it was on the right side, really didn't affect our traffic counts. So to your question on seasonality, yes, that exists. What we can do is look at the state's average data because they actually evaluate seasonality, and we can apply a seasonality factor. In this case, we got some pretty good data that the September, especially when you first start school and everyone's going on time, and we haven't hit the weather delays yet. Certainly weather can impact it, and there was actually a weather event this week on the 29th, I believe. There was a rain and a state of emergency condition. So our ATR picked that up and we discounted it. But our turning movement counts were, our main concerns are making sure that the weather is good, so we see pedestrians and bikes if they're out. Usually speaking, we'll find that early fall or late spring has some of the better pedestrian and bicycle data, which was also part of our analysis here.
And your primary focus is not flow, but volume?
So once we get it into the model, we are looking for flow.
Just so I'm using the right term.
Absolutely.
Speed would be my translation to flow. In other words, if your speed limit is 30 miles an hour, then everybody's kind of moving along except for lights at roughly 30 miles an hour.
So our model will tell us if people are driving notably less than that. We have like a travel time where we can say they're going 17 miles per hour. We also do travel time runs. So we get in our cars, we have either dashboard cam that will actually give us our speeds, and they can register kind of like a GoPro, or we time it. We use that as like a supplemental to the capacity analysis to say, okay, it's congested and the speed limit's 30 and I can't drive more than 10 miles per hour at this time. So there's some synonymousness to level of service, but then to your point, flow, for instance, a lot of times when I come to these meetings, the big concern is, okay, every intersection I don't wait that long at, but I hit every red light. That's part of this analysis and part of my recommendations, but also that's something we do more qualitatively until we build a really robust model. Like we could simulate everyone driving down it, but we drive down it, we do field observations. So we were out there all day on Tuesday, we were out there the following day, all day on Wednesday. We get that feel for how often we're hitting all of the red lights, how the traffic is operating. And I'll show you some videos too that we capture of those difficulties. So it does take flow into consideration. You can't have horrible flow and have great levels of service. They don't go like that. But they are two more nuanced sides of traffic.
And one single day you're comfortable, that's enough to get an accurate sample.
So that's why we put the ATR down, because that does give us 7. So for instance, what we do is we'll take our Tuesday and we see how our Tuesday compared to our Wednesday and our Thursday. So we actually got 3 typical weekdays. And as long as our Tuesday is approximately average or higher than all the other days, then that gave us a good representation.
And you know the details and
Yep.
information.
We also will pull, so because this is a state route, we have old state data, and we can use that to check and see if our numbers were in line. If, like, for instance, if they had 2020 data where we know traffic was impacted that was notably higher than us, I'd be concerned our volumes weren't quite on. But normally a traffic study like this is done off of the day of traffic counts that is calibrated, good weather, and then checked off of an ATR.
Thank you.
No problem. If you want to go to the next. So the results are, this is our capacity analysis. So these are intersections that we look at using a program called Synchro. It basically puts all of those traffic volumes in, puts whether there's parking lanes, pedestrians crossing, bus stops, and it comes up with a grade. It also comes up with a delay. The delay is far more important than the grade. For instance, an A is not more favorable than a B. If I have 10 seconds of delay versus 15 seconds of delay, if you're a driver and you only wait 15 seconds to make a turn, you're kind of unfazed by that. What we're looking for is when it starts to feel personally as it's an impact. So in this case, what I've highlighted here are locations that are beyond level of service D. So they're into level of service E. That means they have 50 seconds of delay or more to make a movement. More than 55 seconds in some situations. As you can see, it is very centric around the area between Heritage Hill and Main Street, as well as Riverview, which is affected a lot by what's happening at the traffic signal at Heritage Hill. And then Sunnyside is one of your more major intersections as well. So that has, during the peak AM, PM, you have some difficulty getting off of Sunnyside Lane. That's not surprising to me. The traffic lights, when it's on a state road, are there to prioritize state road traffic. So that delay, if that was your only congested area, I wouldn't be overly surprised by it. But clearly you have some delay. A lot of that is around the school, but you'll see, for instance, at Riverview Road, that road isn't difficult to get out of just during the AM peak when the school is happening. It's difficult during all 3 peak periods we analyzed, including the midday. So that's definitely a difficult road to get out of, especially because it doesn't have that traffic signal. Heritage Hill, similarly, even if cars are trying to get out from the school in the AM, in the midday and the PM, they're having just as difficult of a time getting off of that road. And southbound during the AM, which I'll show you a video of in a second that I know you know well, but that we captured to kind of help us understand how the traffic is operating. Southbound during the AM, there's a lot of cars trying to make a left into the school. That's pretty much taking up one of the entire lanes, and then we have the other lane that's a bypass lane, but we also have traffic enforcement agents. which I'll talk about in a second, out there controlling and making sure that pedestrians can cross safely both there and at Broadway. And so that can a lot of times add to additional congestion. So I don't think this surprises anyone with the findings that we have right now, but our primary, there's one, the southbound during the AM at Broadway and Heritage rises to the level of service F. So it is failing, it is over capacity. It is during one peak period right at a school, so I am not surprised. There's going to be limited improvements that can be done specifically to that movement. The rest of it is level of service E. So you are congested, you do have large queues and backups. Under an existing conditions, this isn't all that bad. For planned increases in traffic, this is something to start paying attention to, because increases will make this go up and make these delays more notable very quickly. When you're already at capacity, you have a very small amount of traffic you could take without an improvement before that capacity and that congestion starts to feel astronomically larger than what it is today.
Can I answer your question? It's a little bit off of a tangent, and that is, in your analysis, were you able to see how many people were running the lights?
We're not able to see how many people are running lights unless we see people running the lights. I did notice coming in and doing my 2 field observations that there are a handful of these lights that have long yellows. So while not necessarily directly running the light, there are definitely a lot of people that go directly through that yellow, possibly because they've learned it's 4 or 5 seconds long. But we have video is how we use to collect those turning movement counts, so we could go back and see, like if we knew, for instance, there was a lot, unfortunately we've counted on days, for instance, that there's crashes, we can go back and see what happened. But there are no red light running cameras here for us to know how many people did that.
I only ask because that might be useful information for the police department, because I noticed anecdotally at Broadway and Sunnyside, there's a tremendous problem with people running red lights. And I don't mean yellow, I mean red.
Yes.
And it would be interesting to see if that's a problem at any of these intersections, you know what I mean? But that's beyond the scope of what you did.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's just, you have to basically, in order to have a longer data set of that, you have to have cameras up that are capturing that. So the state has red light running cameras that can be put up, and then that would give you that information. Otherwise, you would be effectively paying someone to stand there or put a camera up long term and then go back and watch all of it to catch those red lights.
Okay, that's more labor intensive.
But at the same time, if we know, for instance, in the AM, as people are frustrated and they're going through that, if we have the right angle with our cameras, we could actually sample, at least with the 2 hours of video we have, to just find that out for you. But usually substantial red light running numbers is something that you had asked me before, if like data is relevant for one day. For turning movement counts, it is, because there's so much data to validate off of. Red light running, I think you would need far more than a single day to get a pattern.
I think you may have addressed this later on in the study, but are some or all of these lights in some way timed, so they sense that they can go either faster or slower with the timing of the red light to allow more cars to come, or they can turn faster at certain times of the day, or?
Yep.
And,
Yeah.
and is that controlled by the state?
That is controlled by the state. All of these traffic signals are controlled by the state. All of these traffic signals have some form of actuation, which is detection that tells you a vehicle is there and I need to get service, I need a certain amount of green time. However, the majority of these intersections don't have actuation on all of the lanes, which means that they're somewhat smart. For instance, what they did is called semi-actuated. The main line on Broadway does not have any detection on it. The state sits on green on Broadway because it's their roadway and it's the major roadway. The side streets all have detectors if they're working. And I know during our study, one of the yours was not working on Heritage Hill. If the side streets are working, then when a car pulls up on it, it tells the traffic signal, and here I need to be serviced. It will then clear the main line for whatever it's programmed to clear. So some of them will still sit for a long time. Then it will go to the side street, it'll service it for the minimum time. And if it doesn't sense another car coming, it'll go back to the main line. And it'll do that for the side streets, and it will also do it for any left turn phasing. If you're waiting to try to make a left off of Broadway, it's also going to do that. All of those traffic lights on this section are designed to do that, but that's not, because I have to point that out for improvements down the line, that's not a smart traffic signal. That's not considered advanced. It's not adjusting its time real time to the demand of cars. It's not, for instance, there's smart traffic signal systems nowadays that could say, I cleared my queue, let me hurry up and get this piece out because these guys are coming, and it kind of knows the systematic picture. That's not what these are. So it's not a traffic signal that's just always saying 10 seconds to you, 5 seconds to you, 10 seconds to you, 5. but it's not smart, if that makes sense. It's a middle of the road traffic signal.
And how do you get a smart signal?
That's the state.
So if this was covered, I apologize, it's a lot of data.
No, absolutely.
But at the presentation you made to us at the beginning of the process, when it was just two members of the board, because it also would have been a meeting, right? You had said that you could do a FOIL to see when the state last timed the lights and everything.
Yes, so we have their timing plans.
Oh, okay.
And then all of our analysis, what we're getting for congested, that's all based on exactly what their traffic signals are doing right now.
Okay.
The difficulty and the nuance of it is actually Heritage Hill Road was far worse during our field observations, because the actuation, the loops that are cut into the ground on Heritage Hill, they were broken on the day we did our analysis. When we went to submit our analysis, and Larry had pointed out that there was an improvement being made there and the state was putting a camera up, when I reached out to the state, they gave me the new timing, because they did retime the light, and that's included. So that analysis still shows, even with your new technology, it still has congestion at it. But the state also mentioned they're planning to retime this entire corridor. That's not included in my study because they're not doing an analysis to retime it. I guess what they're doing is putting cameras on all of your intersections, which is very good for you. It means you'll actually have actuation on every single lane. You'll know when there's a car at any point. And then when they're out doing the cameras, they're going to retime the lights a little bit better than how they are now. That's not, unfortunately, in our analysis, because they have nothing to give me until they do it, and then they'll be able to give me.
Is this retiming part of the state project that's going on now, that we're at the beginning stages of, where they're doing from the bridge all the way down to?
So the retiming is not part of that. They just,
wow.
You asked for a camera, they put one up, then they realized, hey, we got more cameras, this is a priority corridor, we're likely gonna be doing something here, let's put up more cameras.
Okay.
So since they're their traffic signals and they own them, they're gonna go ahead and give you cameras all up and down this, which will be an improvement. But we won't know if the retiming that they're doing field side is good from like a traffic engineer progression standpoint until I get that new timing and I can actually look at it.
Gotcha.
And unfortunately, at this time, they still don't have that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, because Larry, because he's at those meetings, so do you think this will have any, it just will give us evidence in those meetings, but it's not gonna help? The fact they're doing this separately has nothing to do with the corridor-wide thing.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, this happened, I think what Marissa's saying is because the school repaved Heritage Hill.
Gotcha.
They broke the loops and never put them back.
Right, okay.
And then when all hell was breaking loose in September, we were pressing the state to do something about it, and they installed, instead of a loop, they put in a camera, which is a similar system, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Probably works better, but.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're now getting cameras for the whole corridor.
So that triggered then the next part, which was we're getting more.
Which has
So,
nothing to do with
has
the
nothing to do
whole-
with anything that's
Okay,
going on.
gotcha.
That would have happened
All right.
regardless.
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good start then.
It's just luck of the draw. They have to keep their signals in good working order. They have to, and they retrofit, whether you request or not, they still work through retrofitting. These signals needed better detection, and they knew that, and so they're putting cameras up.
Excellent.
When they retime, or put in the cameras, and presumably that changes the time. And we've agreed to put in a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit. Can you use the data you've collected and just remodel it using what you got?
That was always our goal when we first started scoping this, was let's get in existing conditions first. We know that also the community here has feelings about traffic and what levels of traffic they want. So we wanted to get everyone in consensus on the baseline. Now, plus we already know that the baseline is going to be changing shortly. It's a very, very minimal effort to take their timing plans, put them in, you tell me what the new speed limit is, put it in, get new results and tell you if this has changed at all, if it's gotten better or worse. What's important is that we do all of these things in a timely manner, because the data we collected in September is valid now. It's valid through the year. In general, traffic engineers will use this data for 3 years, but your community and yourself will feel most comfortable if we use traffic data in a timely manner. So we can now quickly look at improvements, quickly look at development options. We can look at all different things for you very quickly now that we have this baseline, as long as the data stays relevant. So
Next slide.
so this is our school observations. You may want to.
Sorry, the video, I actually can't move that. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I
Apologize.
apologize for putting it on that side.
No,
I'll be
it's
able
all
to
right.
pull it up afterwards, but I'm fairly certain that you very much get the gist of this particular intersection, and that it was more for myself. So there are 2 schools along this corridor, and we were really trying to focus on how both schools affect traffic. What we generally found, and you can kind of see it from the congestion as well, is that there's first of all, there's traffic enforcement agents for the Irvington High School. They're at Heritage Hill, they're at Main Street, and then also I've noticed there is a traffic enforcement agent for all intents and purposes at the early childcare driveway that's also letting cars out of that driveway during the morning, at least during the morning. This coupled with how many people are trying to get in and out of that driveway leads to notable congestion. The queues are spilled back. They're not necessarily going to Main Street, not all day, every day, but there are notable queues. There are long delays to get through that intersection and frustrated drivers. Southbound is definitely worse because of that left turn. You're trying to get into the school. As far as just to wrap up our school observations, as far as Dow Street, there are not TEAs present. However, we also didn't notice pedestrians trying to cross the street. This video, for instance, I had actually just cropped out some pedestrians for privacy reasons, but we saw pedestrians crossing this regularly. The TEA is assisting them. We did not see that at Dow Street. We didn't have that pedestrian activity. We also didn't have notable backup. We had a queue length of maybe 5 cars at a time trying to turn into there.
It's because they all turned down Station Road.
Yes, and we have some congestion at Station Road, and that traffic signal in particular, if I can segue for a second, was unique in that because of that skew, and you can definitely tell who drives here all the time versus who's driving through, because they'll be at that light and they'll see the other cars coming and they'll see this side street end and they're still sitting at red, and we've got all these videos, the left turning car inching, and they keep getting to that road because Station is not visible from that point coming southbound. And a couple times I saw people think the light was broken and try to start going through it. So if nothing else, signage and having people, it was very interesting because you could tell the people that were very, very local to the community, they waited, they knew, and the people that were just trying to go down 9 were very frustrated, lots of honking. So that light had its own challenges, even if it didn't have, congestion in the sense that these intersections are close together. They're piggybacking on each other and causing problems. You get one red light, you get another red light. It's frustrating. But to wrap this up, that Dow Street School itself, we didn't see notable congestion there that needed to be mitigated or needed a better plan for how school would circulate. It seems to be working fairly well. Again, besides the oddity of how Station Road and that intersection operates, that intersection itself doesn't have notable congestion. It's just more a frustrating intersection for people that aren't familiar with it. So really, once we got south of Main Street and Broadway, the congestion was definitely lighter throughout all of our peak periods than north of Main Street. For the next one, our crash history. So this is unique because we have COVID data now. We always try to exclude 2020 crash data. In most cases, even though people think COVID made crashes worse, and it didn't manifest in the year 2020 necessarily, particularly in local commercial areas. People were not out. We try to exclude 2020 data. In this case, we decided to pull 17 to 19 to get a representation. That's all this is really meant to be. We have 88 reported crashes along the corridor. It's a fair bit for a state highway, which I know this is more of a village. It doesn't necessarily want that, but for the fact that it is a state highway, it's not a notable amount of crashes. What we then start to look at is per location, per intersection, if there's a problem area in particular. 30 injuries is fairly notable within 88 reported crashes. 2 crashes involving a pedestrian, we always flag those. Crashes with pedestrians and bicycles, we want none. Obviously, Vision Zero. We don't want any crashes at all, but I can guarantee you that those are counted for in the injuries. So we took a closer look at those. All 3 of the crashes with vulnerable road users, which is the bicycle and the pedestrian, all occurred at Broadway and Main Street. That's the only high crash location on the corridor. High crash for us is defined as 10 or more crashes in a 12-month period. Each 12-month period had about 8, but when you roll them over, because it doesn't have to be a calendar year, we got 10. So they're right on the cusp of a high crash location. One thing we absolutely don't want to see, though, is crashes with pedestrians. So both of those crashes happened to be vehicles going straight through the intersection, so they weren't turning. The pedestrian was on, in this case, presumably Route 9 crossing, and the car just went right through and hit them. We don't have any deaths, so they were likely not moving very fast, which is great. This road is signed for 30. People are going 35 to 37 if there's no congestion. Hopefully at this particular intersection it was lower. The bicycle was actually turning out of this. We're parked on the westbound approach toward Broad. and toward Maine, and the car made a left out of here to go southbound on Broadway, and the bicycle was going through and it hit the bicycle. You can kind of tell from the bushes, it's a little bit cropped. This sight line might not be ideal, and so there might be some signage or something that can assist with this. You know, the crosswalks, for instance, are very faded, so some of that can be improved for visibility of pedestrian and bicycles. So all in all, the crashes there is a high crash location. It's not surprising it's this particular one. Luckily, you do have no fatalities, but I would still take measures to try to prevent that from happening in the future when you do have some pedestrians having issues at this intersection.
Do you know what happened with the state's plan to redo this intersection? I know there's a series of intersection improvement projects, and this one was in the middle of being engineered.
Oh, I can
Great.
follow up on it. I don't
Yeah.
know if they then enrolled it into their corridor study since they are currently doing that, but we can
Maybe.
follow up on that design pretty easily.
Yeah, I'm just curious, because when we were doing the sidewalks on Station Road and the pedestrian ramps on Main Street, the engineers that we had for that, Creighton Manning, they were engaged, at least for an initial part of it, to do the work at the Main Street intersection. And then they were disengaged. So I never heard anything after that.
No problem. Well, we can follow up on the status of that and if they dropped the entire project or if it just went into hibernation. So yeah, I can follow up on that. Do you want to go to the next slide? So the last results I mentioned, we did a signal warrant analysis. We actually did 4 different warrant analysis. There's a bunch of different criteria you can warrant a traffic signal for. Effectively, we looked at anyone that Strawberry Lane could possibly meet. So we did an 8 hours of volumes have to be met. We did a 4 hour, 4 hours volumes have to be met. A peak hour where you only have to meet the volumes for 1 single hour. And then a crash warrant, which requires 5 or more crashes in a 12-month period. Strawberry Lane does not warrant for any of these. We also, obviously Riverview is the one I spoke to you about as being the most congested of the ones we looked at that was a side street. Those volumes also don't rise to the level of a warrant. I don't have the ATRs to be able to do an 8 or a 4 for that intersection, but I do have the peak hour. Usually you would expect at least the peak hour to meet, and then the criteria goes down for 4 and 8 hours, but the state very rarely will put in a traffic signal for only meeting a peak hour warrant. And in this case, Riverview also doesn't meet that. Now, that's not to say it won't in the future, so our study says monitor it, keep an eye on it, because if there's a development near there, it might push it over the edge, but at the moment, the traffic volumes don't reach that level.
It would be a strange, I'm sorry. I live on Riverview. It would be a strange place though to put a light because of the proximity to the other light.
Yeah, you have to tie them together, and that's the other thing to root for is you know, there's a lot of people who come places and it's very difficult to get off a side street, and then so the immediate solution is please give me a traffic signal. Don't want to put traffic signals everywhere. That's why the state has tried to make it harder with the 8 hour and the 4 hour warrants, because border and collisions happen at traffic signals. They're too closely spaced. That creates a lot of driver frustration with red light. So even if you did warrant, I wouldn't necessarily be telling you to put one there. But if you warranted very heavily and no one could get out of that street, there would be options with the fact that it's close to adjacent intersections to tie them together and make them work together so that you could do it. But because of that complexity, I wouldn't just jump at the first time you warrant to put a traffic signal there.
You mentioned that in the presentation, that it's too close together, that we likely wouldn't be able to provide a review even if the numbers justified it here.
But again, like, so Harriman and Station, right, those are slightly offset and basically on top of each other. They're operating as one traffic signal for that reason. So that's something you could do if you really needed one at Riverview. But if you also think about the difficulties of maneuvering the Harriman and Station intersection, that's the trade-off of trying to do something that's a little bit more unique into a traffic signal. Is, you know, it creates its own problems.
Yeah, I mean, the volume is so different though with that station Harriman than,
Yes,
you know, than the backup from Heritage and, I mean, you know, and Broadway.
absolutely.
I can't even envision that working, how that would work.
Yeah, and you don't need it for today, even with the gap analysis too. So a gap analysis, we basically spend the peak hours observing, looking for gaps of 8 seconds or more. That's traffic engineers' number of when we think a vehicle would make a maneuver. Most vehicles would make a maneuver. For Circle, Fargo, and Riverview, 1 or 2 opportunities to turn onto Route 9 in 1 minute. It's not terrible. You're waiting approximately 30 seconds. That's quite good. When you're on a state road and you're a side street coming out of a state road, and I know, again, I have to caveat that I understand this is a village, no one wants to be on the state road, but when you are, you do inevitably have traffic. Levels of service where you can get out within 30 seconds is quite good. for a state road. So that's good. The only one that we are, again, flagging to watch is Riverview, because with the level of service already poor, there's more cars waiting. So if each car waits 30 seconds and I am 5 cars back, I'm waiting quite a long time. For Circle and Fargo, there was never more than 1 or 2 cars at a time. So when I got up and I got my 30 seconds, it was just 30 seconds to a minute to get out. For the next one. So we broke our recommendations into 3 basic categories. Traffic operations is the focus. I felt as an operational study was the focus, because a lot of when we first had our meeting and our discussion was, is there low-hanging fruit, so to speak, on improvements? For instance, the traffic signals have not been retimed in a very long time and they can be fixed. This study stopped short of that, right? We're just trying to get a baseline right now that works. It's a good thing we did, because with the state retiming it right now, let's let them do that. Let's get those timing plans, and then I can tell you if I would recommend changing them further and asking the state for that. But at the moment, so we have some areas to focus on for traffic operations and congestion. I would still recommend, because we were just speaking to it, that when the state has their new timing plans, that we put that in the full model. It's not expensive to do, it's not time consuming to do. We'll rerun everything and make sure these congestion areas don't notably change. I don't expect them to. The school in that area is the most congested, but let's just be sure. And then you have an area of focused higher levels of congestion between Main Street all the way up to Riverview and honestly Sunnyside Lane. You could focus any future recommendations on trying to optimize moving cars within that period, within those traffic signals. And then, like I said, the traffic signal equipment. There's other things beyond cameras that can be done, so that's something we can get into if we're evaluating opportunities for improving congestion here. Again, there's smarter traffic signals that can do better. And I would expect that if the state is looking to road diet or do any improvements along this corridor, they're already very familiar and big proponents of smart traffic signals. I do imagine that it's likely going to be envisioned as part of that project. But we can give you an idea of what they would do and how you should expect for them to move your traffic better. So that's for traffic operations. For pedestrian operations, which is the next slide. Really notably, again, if there's an opportunity for this, not having sidewalk along the east side of Broadway from the church to Sunnyside Lane, especially when there's bus stops there today, it would be a great opportunity. Curb extensions for shorter crossings. You know, I know this isn't a super wide road to begin with, but where their curbs can be extended, making sure that parking doesn't go all the way up to intersections, which affects the visibility of pedestrians for crossing, is a good idea. ADA ped ramps, there are a lot of ped ramps, but making sure they're ADA accessible. This is just throughout New York State, and particularly throughout Westchester, New York, difficult. A lot of these don't meet ADA standards. Anyone coming in to do any improvements, I would just recommend making sure that everything they're doing is to ADA standards to help you get closer to meeting that goal. In-road pedestrian warning signs. So those are, you know, they're low to the ground. They sit kind of flat plastic signs right on the double yellow, and it says yield to pedestrians when crossing. It's a short term. I would give it a try and see, you know, especially when there seems to be this, the TAs are there to protect the pedestrians in the morning. But I will note that both of those pedestrian crashes happened in the afternoon. So the problem is, in the morning we have full protection, in the afternoon we have no protection, or in the evening hours, the early evening hours, I put those signs out and make people aware that this is a pedestrian focused corridor. And that would be, you know, something really short term and very easy you could be doing now.
Regarding the sidewalk along the east side of Broadway, there's a historic wall that runs the full length of Broadway, so I would imagine adding a sidewalk would narrow Broadway, the road itself, which then would probably make it into a one lane road, because my understanding is it's already minimally wide enough for a 2-lane.
Yes.
That's going to then change all the numbers and all the calculations of traffic
Yes.
during that entire.
Yeah. So if you can't get, you'd have to have a civil engineer really look at how close you could get that sidewalk. Maybe you can't get a fully standard 5-foot sidewalk, but you could get a 3, maybe you could get a paved shoulder. It just depends on how far back that wall set is and how close you could dig to it and whether it would compromise it. So that would have to be evaluated. If that's not feasible, then I more so say it because also the state is currently evaluating road dieting the corridor. And if they were going to go down to 1 lane, I would absolutely you would have that extra space. I would make sure that that extra space was allocated toward pedestrian facilities. So to your point, if it cannot be done today, understand that then there's a choice to be made between traffic operations, but there is also consideration maybe, and that's on my next slide of working with Westchester County for transit, there still should be some consideration for maybe where the bus stops are and whether you can at least get a crossing so that people will stay on one side of the sidewalk and they can get to the bus stop. Right now, it's kind of not a build it and they will come with the sidewalk. They're already there and they don't have that facility to walk on. But if you get any kind of road dieting, I would absolutely make sure, and that's why the recommendation is here, that with that extra space, it's not immediately going to wider shoulders or bike lanes. Bike lanes are great, but you have pedestrians, you have bus usage here. I'd make sure that you have a sidewalk.
New York State's looking at all of this as part of the engineering study that's
Yes.
ongoing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we effectively overlap them, and the thought was always that we give you a baseline for what we think specific to the village. And then when they have a plan and you'll have our analysis and you'll have our data to compare it against and see
No, we
how
felt
it works for you.
being armed with this information as we go into those meetings is invaluable. So
Yes.
that's one of the main reasons why.
And again, we have this model now, so it's one of those things where you say the state changed their timing plan again, they gave us this new time plan, can you put it in? We just really can run it very quickly. And then lastly, so the transit is on the last slide. Again, enhanced bus stop amenities, so that part of that is making sure that there is place for people to stand if there's no sidewalk, but then also where there's bus stops and they're heavily utilized, opportunities to put in benches and actual bus stops and increase bus usage. For those people that do take the bus, the more enjoyable it is to take the bus, the more I'm shielded from the weather, the less vehicles we have on the road. So encouraging transit usage by making the amenities is useful. And then relocating bus stops to the far side of intersections. There's a handful of bus stops, and it's documented throughout our study, where they're stopping before they've gone through the traffic lane. That's poor for visibility. If pedestrian starts to cross, the bus is still parked here. It affects operations because that lane is now not being able to be utilized to get through the intersection. We want bus stops to be on the far side as many times as possible. The Beeline is well aware that Westchester County has been contacted by many municipalities, and I would recommend some coordination to get your bus stops moved far side on all of your signalized intersections.
How hard is that? Is that something, working with Westchester County, that's fairly easy to get done?
Yeah, if they're willing to do it too, especially like if, for instance, there happens to be a shelter and a bench and someone has to come relocate that. In most of these instances, you have a sign. So they just need to relocate the sign, and then they need to change their route to just say it's that far side stop. But people go to where the sign is. It is quite easy.
At Broadway and Sunnyside, they're on the wrong side on both ways.
Yes,
They're on the near side of both ways.
yes.
But it's also geographic. I mean, there's I would be very hard, because that's also a weird intersection with the estate coming up, I'm trying to picture where on the southbound Broadway you could put it on the far. I think it was more put that way because there was room.
And sometimes that happens, like sometimes they'll have a valid reason for why it can't be far side. But where you can, for instance, at Broadway and Main, those ones should be far side.
And I think the northbound one at Broadway and Sunnyside could easily move to the north side of the intersection.
Yeah, and that was where a lot of the construction was going on before. A lot of, and it's an opportunity thing, like DOT owns these traffic signals. When they see that something's not working, we'll just go to camera instead of just fixing the loops. It's easier for us, and that's something they're doing across the board. Similarly, the Beeline, if they're making changes, they are now aware that it's better for their traffic operations to be far side. The state's been coordinating with them, so where they can be doing it, they're probably already trying to do it. So that's the summary of our recommendations on where we are after the existing conditions. And so I know I've prefaced that a couple times to point out that we haven't looked at anything into the future just yet. It was always envisioned that we would do this first, see the concerns and see what you would want to focus on for the future before taking that on.
Which is what we discussed at the initial meeting.
Absolutely. But I
You
like
kept
to
your word.
I like to caveat because I also know that you got letters and the community concern, and in case anyone is logging on watching and wondering like, well, okay, but what about if this goes here or this goes here? This is all the basis for that. So I know we've discussed it, but I do this a lot. I'm always prepared to go and someone say, well, you didn't really give me anything yet. We wanted to make sure this was very sound. There was a lot of people that, when we talk to everyone here and we have these community meetings, I drive this, I know this, it's this far side. It's a very intelligent traffic conversation about where that congestion is. We really wanted to give this an opportunity for everyone to review it and get a sense for no, that's absolutely not what I'm feeling. This person did not get it right. You know, we don't drive this road as much as you drive this road. We want to make sure that this is right.
No, the data is invaluable with this whole New York State corridor thing, and to have for Irvington to be able to advocate. So this is really, it's unbelievable. So it's really great.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
I'm sure there'll be follow-up as things change, but we'll see how quickly they change.
Yeah, no problem. We'll thank your cameras for going up this month, so I'll send you an email as soon as I find out that they
Yeah,
will.
that's good
Yeah,
news.
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for all you do.
Great, thank you, Marcy.
Thank you.
Okay. On to overview of the 2024-25 operating budget.
Yes, so attached to the agenda was the budget overview that I wrote up, along with the tax cap calculation. So I figured I'll kind of go through the different categories in the write-up, and if there's questions, we can go over those. So the budget essentially started within the last couple weeks of December. The various departments were given their budgets from last year and asked to work on their budget requests, give as much detail as possible. Last year, before we started the budget, we kind of gave everybody a baseline of how much to cut. We didn't do that this year. We more so wanted them to come up with a well thought out budget, cut where possible, give itemized detail of their requests, look at prior year budget to actuals to come up with their requests. So those are due back to me on Friday, so I'll meet with the different departments. We'll go over their budgets, and then my goal is to distribute the different budget requests before the meeting, so everyone has time to review those.
Katie, just a
Yeah.
quick question. Will we have an opportunity to sort of see the budgets, like the actuals to budget, like those numbers?
Yes,
I think that
so
was what
I
we struggled with last year,
think
right?
so in the budget, like the way it's set up, it would have 2022 actuals and then the 2023 original budget, and then this year's budget
So we
request.
would be able to,
Yeah,
okay.
and then there's also year-to-date, I think there's a year-to-date column in there too. So the first major category is salaries. So we have increases of 365,000 in the original budget calculations, and because of collective bargaining agreements, I'm not really going to go over too much detail on that in the meeting. Next is health insurance. So I feel every year health insurance premiums increase. So the January 2024 rate for a family plan increased by 6%, which is on top of last year, which was 14.9%. And then the January 2024 individual plan rates also increased by 7.5% compared to 12.5% the prior year. So on average, over the past 3 years, individual plans increased by 10.4% per year, and family plans increased on average 11.2%. So based on the averages, this year's budget calculation, I used an 11% increase number. So we know, since our fiscal year is June through May, we know what the rates are now for June 2025 through December 2025. It would just be the remaining months that this 11% increase is applied to. So that increase, in addition to several policies getting added on due to retirements, we had a new police officer added, and even throughout this year, 3 employees switched from the health buyout option to family plan. So all those items together result in increased costs. So when someone retires, we still incur the cost for their health insurance plan, and then we would also take on the cost of the new replacement. So the net impact across all funds is about 304,000. 295,000 of that is in the general and library funds combined, because those are the two funds that impact the tax cap calculation. And then as a point of information, so a current family plan without an employee contribution is 40,400 per year, and an individual plan without an employee contribution is 17,400 per year. So the next area, which is the biggest increase, is retirement contributions. So the contribution rates are released by the New York State Retirement System. The 2024-25 fiscal year includes major cost hikes. This is a result of the state retirement system sustaining its biggest loss in state fiscal year 2023 since 2009. For the village, ERS, which is everybody other than the police, Tier 4 rates, which is the largest payroll sector, the rates increase from 14.9% to 17.8%. And for police and fire, Tier 2 contribution rates, which is the biggest category, increased from 30.4% to 34.8%. So as longtime employees retire and new employees come in, they'll be in the higher tier number, which has a lower contribution rate. So over time, that will change. And also in the newer tiers, once they're over a certain overtime amount, that's no longer pensionable. When in the older tiers, all of the overtime is pensionable. So the total impact of these increases is about 384,000 across all funds. So in our tax cap calculation, we do get a little break. Not that the taxes wouldn't increase because of this, but in the tax cap calculation, there is a total exclusion of 62,840. Okay, so the next category is workers' compensation, which I didn't get. Our insurance carrier is working on numbers for that, but over the past several years, that hasn't really changed too much. So at this point, I didn't put any increases in for that. On the other hand, general liability insurance, which also we don't have the indications on yet. I should have those within the next week or two. Looking at past increases, last year was 11%, and the year before that was about 7%. So this year, just for a preliminary figure, I use 9%, which would result in a 39,000 increase in the general fund.
So Katie, you've had no conversations with our insurance agent about what that's going to be?
So I reached out to them and they said, oh, it's looking good, inflation's going down, so the increases won't be as high. So I'm hoping 9% is like a conservative number. When they get back to me in the next couple of weeks, it'll be much lower than that.
Okay, because my co-op had 150% increase this year. The insurance
my
industry is
gosh.
in uproar, and we had trouble getting the policy at all, because so many people pulled out of doing residential like that. So, yeah, so I guess that doesn't affect us. A municipality is different, so.
I mean, it can have an impact. We're in a municipal cooperative, so
Right.
it can be a little bit different.
Okay.
But that's not to say that if there's some larger issues in the reinsurance market or in some other areas that they could still have an impact.
Because I reached out to Mary Jane about it, and there was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a New York State Assembly hearing on it. They had a bunch of insurance people at the table and stuff. So I'm just, I'm glad to hear that you actually spoke to someone. That's why I was asking. Because
Yes.
I'm hearing, and we're not the only ones. It's not like we were this weird aberration. Like I said, they had this whole hearing about it because this is happening all over the place. So I'm glad that maybe we're shielded a little bit from it, from the cooperatives.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, in the initial conversations, I don't know if it was just kind of like a sales tactic, but it didn't seem like it was going to be too terrible.
Okay, good.
I know last year, cybersecurity insurance was a big one. So hopefully that one's not a major increase this year.
All right, thank you. Sorry to derail you.
No, that's okay. All right, so next up is debt service. So in this year's capital budget, additional borrowings of 2.15 million were added on. So our total outstanding ban is 7.7 million. So interest rates increased from 4.01% last year to 4.5% this year. However, we did receive a 49,526 bond premium, which results in a net 3.857% interest rate. So for this budget, it'll actually be recorded as a revenue, the premium, so that will offset the increase in the interest costs. So the total result is an increase of 217,697, offset by the 49,526 for a total of 168,000 added to the tax levy. And then we also have the serial bond debt payment piece, which we do have debt service fund balance, which gets amortized over the next 3 years for 200,000 each year. So our debt service payments for the serial bonds are actually reduced by 34,000. So in total, for all these debt service areas, there's an increase of 134,480. There's also an amount set aside in contingency for IDAC assistance, so that's also subject that'll be subject to negotiation.
What was the amount? Did you say an amount?
Oh, yeah, that one we're not saying in public
Oh,
yet,
okay.
because.
You just said an amount, okay.
Yes.
Just-
An amount,
Yes.
An
okay.
amount, yeah.
No,
an
that makes-
undisclosed amount.
And actually, some of the internal communication from Katie to you with all the spreadsheet
Well,
back
sure, yeah.
has that information in there.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me, that given that there's a fairly large gap to make up, just using the tax cap calculation, that most of the increases are, I'll call it, employee-based, meaning salary, health insurance, retirement. And those aren't gonna change dramatically, which means you're squeezing the other parts. And anything new that's coming along.
So on the other side, we have the revenues, so sales tax.
Or increase your revenues, that's a.
Yes. So sales tax revenue for the second half of 2023 is up about 2.5% over last year. So if all remains the same for this year, we should have about $120,000 dollar surplus on that line. So budgeting conservatively, not expecting that the percentage of sales tax keeps increasing. I think we could increase this line about $75,000. On the other end of it is the mortgage tax revenue, which is significantly down. For the first half of the year, it was down 57% from the prior year. So it went from 195,000 to 84,000. So this will likely result in a budget shortfall this year. So to plan for a continued decrease in mortgage tax revenues, I decreased this line by 70,000 down to 155,000.
We could hope that that number could be higher, given that the interest rates are likely to come down
Yeah,
and there would be more real estate activity.
yes. So if we want to budget that way, we can always
Trying to
increase it.
find revenue.
Well, we've hit the perfect storm because you had the difficult market during the time when they're doing the calculation for the retirement. And the rates going up, which costs us for the borrowings. But you're right, when rates go the other way and the market starts to come back up again, there's gonna be a lag before you see that impact. So it might be next year or the budget or the year after.
Tax cap calculation doesn't take into account any lags.
No, I understand. I get it.
You need to be
It's
compliant
a
each year,
snapshot, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the frustrating
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
Because the real world has lags.
So in the area of interest and earnings, so looking at June 2022 through December 2023, interest rates have ranged from 0.03% to 5.29%, which is about where we are right now. So the expectation is that interest rates aren't going to continue at that high throughout all of the next budget year. So my initial budget calculations assume an interest earnings at an average rate of 2.5%, which would result in a revenue increase of about 200,000. So that's another area that, we could either, we want to assume the rates are going to be higher, we could increase that, or lower, then we would decrease that. Cell tower revenues are based on a lease agreement, and there's escalations each year within that lease agreement for the lessor, the sublessees. So based on that, that revenue line can be increased by 22,400. The surplus line, so that's how much of fund balance we decide to appropriate. So last year, in the budget, 226,000 of fund balance was appropriated. Of that amount, 198,000 was to balance the budget, and the additional 28,000 was to bring back the retired parks laborer for 1 year for training purposes. So for the original calculations, I have the surplus at 198,000.
Katie, can you remind us approximately how much money is in our fund balance and what percentage that represents of measurements of?
So as of May 31st, 2023, our unassigned fund balance was about 7 million. So if our total operating budget was,
I think we were in the low 30% range.
That's about 30%.
Yeah.
30 to 35%, it was pretty healthy.
And what's the New York State recommendation?
Over 25% is considered excessive.
Look at whether you're examining potential large capital projects, that could be applied to it.
Exactly, so that could be reevaluated for sure. But over 25%, the state audit will probably say that you have excessive fund balance. So we had a valid reason, as you said, but that's a number.
okay, so that brings us to the tax cap calculation. So the way that works is we start with the prior year's tax levy, which was 16,023,864, and then we get assigned a tax-based growth factor, and that's for new additions to the tax base. So usually if there's certificates of occupancy filed and new construction, that's what would be included there. So our tax base growth factor is 1.0187. And the tax cap this year is at a maximum of 2%. So the Office of the State Controller has calculated inflation for our budgetary period to be 4.37%. So since the 2% is lower than the 4.37, that's what we're capped at. And then we have the 62,840 exclusion for the pension and retirement, since that increased by so much. And then we had our prior year carry forward of 3,896. So based on the tax cap calculation, the tax levy can increase by a maximum of 693,172, or 4.33%, to remain compliant with the tax cap levy. So at this point, we're about 428,000 over the cap.
Big number.
Yes,
And that doesn't take into account any of the departmental
right.
budgets, right? This is just
Okay,
items outside of the departments that Katie's aware of.
got it. Well, appreciate the overview, and obviously we got a lot more work to do.
Yes.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions? Okay. Next up is the submission of Bridge New York grant application for North Broadway culvert.
Yeah, so, well, it's just that. So we're applying again this year for a Bridge New York grant. We were successful last year in receiving a grant for the culvert that crosses Broadway in front of the Downingwood development. This year, we are seeking a grant to increase replace the culvert directly adjacent to 41 North Broadway. So it's north of Riverview Road, south of Circle Drive. So it's in between somewhere there. And it's entirely under the state roadway. And the numbers for that, I know I left them blank and I apologize for that, but we're
I got it.
pulling numbers together at the last minute. But the numbers for that, the project cost is estimated to be $1,084,000. And the grant that we're seeking is $975,000, or 90%.
That's a great grant.
Well,
I get it.
we have to get it first. But that's the project.
So
I didn't say it's our grant, I said it's a great grant.
yes, it is.
Yes.
So the resolution is resolved the Village of Irvington applied for, that the Village of Irvington applied for financial assistance from the New York State Office of Parks, Rec, and Historic
Nope,
Preservation
Wrong
under
one.
Title IX. No, I'm sorry.
Wrong one.
Oh, Matheson Park. Sorry. We'll get to that. Sorry. Whereas the Village of Irvington is applying to the New York State Department of Transportation for a grant under the 2024 Bridge New York Grant Program for the North Broadway Culvert Mitigation Project. And whereas the cost of the project is estimated to not exceed $1,084,000, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees does hereby authorize submission of the application for a grant not to exceed $975,000 under the 2024 Bridge New York Grant Program for the North Broadway Culvert Mitigation Project, and further resolved that the village administrator is hereby authorized to sign and submit said application consistent with this resolution. And I'll make that motion. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next up is accepting grant funds for the Matheson Park Stage project that I'm so eager to do. I started ahead of time. I guess I'll just read through the resolution and consider it my motion here. Resolved that the Village of Irvington applied for financial assistance from the New York State Office of Parks, Rec, and Historic Preservation under Title IX of the Environmental Protection Act of 1993 for the purpose of funding the development of the Matheson Park Stage. Resolved that the Village of Irvington is authorized and directed to accept these grant funds in an amount not to exceed $500,000 for the project described in the grant application. Resolved that the Village of Irvington is authorized and directed to agree to the terms and conditions of the master contract with OPRHR, that's Office of Parks, Rec, and Historic Preservation, for such development of the Matheson Park Stage. Resolved that the Village of Irvington is authorized and directed to agree to the terms and conditions of any required deed of easement granted to OPRHP that affects title to real property owned by the municipality and approved by the grant funds, which may be a duly recorded public access covenant, conservation easement, and/or preservation covenant. And resolved that the governing body of the municipality delegates signing authority to execute the master contract and any amendments thereto, any required deed of easement, and any other certifications to the village administrator. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, next is volunteer appointments. And my motion is resolved to appoint the following village board volunteer committee members. ARB, Libby Lando, term to expire 2029. Tree Preservation Committee, Warwick Norton, term to expire 2026. And further resolved to appoint the following ad hoc volunteer committee members with a term to expire December 2024. Housing Committee member Dylan Douglas. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, reports of board, standing committees and offices.
No report.
Okay.
The theater committee had canceled their meeting, so I don't know.
Let me just quickly read what
Sure.
George sent me from DPW. He so nicely put together. So, he sent me a report on the highway department activities. They removed tree stumps in multiple areas of the village. They've scheduled 7 more, weather dependent. Repair the catch basin at 58 Manor Pond Lane. Work together with IPD and Greenberg Traffic Bureau to transition Park Sideway to a one-way street. Excavated and waterproofed the foundation at the DPW superintendent's office, and they assisted Parks and Recs in the removal of ornamental grasses, and working on winter storms. From the 6th to the 7th, 4.5 inches of snow. So as we all know, they do a great job.
Yeah.
Amazing job clearing the streets for us during the storm.
Absolutely.
Village administrator as well.
And today as well.
We have one more trustee, may have a
Oh.
report.
I'm sorry, Lon.
Hey, no problem. Yeah, just really quick for the building department. They are continuing to work through the bugs in the new permitting software, and they've scheduled required continuing education for the building inspectors. That's it.
Well, I don't have much of a report. I have plenty in executive session, but we were advised by Metro North that the train station, Ardsley on Hudson train station, closed in their transaction with the private owner that was renting or leasing it previously. So that transaction closed. We've yet to see the deed or anything else in there. We're going to try to get a copy of that. I think there's some in the community that are trying to get a copy of it already. But that, wanted to let the board know about that.
And clerk treasurer's report?
Just very quickly, if anyone's watching, any parking permits will be mailed out within the next week or so. The current ones expire at the end of January. It wasn't at the end of December.
Got
That's
it.
it.
Okay. Any public comment? Anybody online?
There's no one with their hand up.
Okay, then I'm gonna move that we go to executive session regarding real estate and personnel matters.
So
Second.
moved,
All in
seconded,
favor?
okay.
Staying here was always fast.
What do you wanna do?
You can stay here,
That's
yeah.
fine.